Greetings, denizens of the night, and welcome to Fangs After Dark. It's been quite a while. I've been dealing with a lot of personal things, mental health and whatnot, and it's taken me a minute to get this review out for Vampire The Masquerade Bloodlines 2 that came out on the 21st of October. I have played through the game twice now, full playthroughs, and I feel like I've got a good grasp on the game, along with all of the controversies that are surrounding it, especially with this $37 million loss that the game has suffered. Objectively, the game is considered to be a failure sales-wise, financially, but I still want to talk about it. So if you're ready to listen, I'll give you my take on the game itself. So, first off, what did I think of the game? I think the game was pretty serviceable overall. I enjoyed playing it. It was very, very pretty to look at. The character models I really enjoyed. The music I enjoyed. And overall, the gameplay, even though it was very action forward, I did enjoy the game. Now, there were aspects of the game that I didn't enjoy. There were some grindy aspects to the gameplay that I wasn't a big fan of, like having to farm resonance to unlock abilities, and then having to use your ability points to then have to unlock the abilities to just be able to use them even more. Having all of the abilities be available, but only being able to use 4 at a given time was kind of annoying. But at the end of the day, I did enjoy playing the game. But as what a lot of people would guess, this, in my opinion, is not a Bloodlines game. It is a Vampire the Masquerade game, and on that token, if I were to rate this game, not comparing it to Bloodlines or not having the expectations that it was going to be a Bloodlines game, I would probably rate this game probably a 7 out of 10. It's a decent vampire game that I think if people who enjoy vampires and want to sink their teeth, sink their fangs into a vampire setting, they would probably enjoy playing this game once or twice for sure. When it comes to being a Vampire the Masquerade veteran, which is what I am, having played Bloodlines countless times with mods and all sorts of other stuff that's come out by the fan base, I think this game definitely falls short of that expectation, and I would probably rate it maybe like a 5 out of 10 in that regard. It has barely any continuity with the first Bloodlines games. It doesn't have a whole lot of familiar mechanics that we associate with the Bloodlines franchise for Vampire the Masquerade. You can't make your own custom character because you're playing Fire, who's an elder. There isn't really any RPG tabletop mechanics that have been transcribed into a video game format like the original Bloodlines game did with the I think it was 2nd edition, Vampire the Masquerade. There really isn't a lot of that translation there. There are aspects of the World of Darkness that are in there. There's lore, there's the powers and things of that nature, but it's not really structured as it should be for it to be considered a Bloodlines game. And then the one Bloodlines piece of content that it actually ties it into the first game is relatively weak because it only involves, spoiler, a cameo by Miss Damsel later on in the game where you only have really a conversation with her. And as far as the voice acting goes, a lot of the voice acting in this game is really good. There were a couple characters that I didn't really like the voice acting for, and Damsel was one of them. It sounds like the voice actress was trying way too hard to be like the one from the first game, and it just falls really awkward. Now, don't get me wrong, when this first appeared and it happened, I didn't know this was going to happen. I know that in the first rendition of Bloodlines 2, the Hardsuit Labs version, they were going to have Damsel show up, and I think she was going to play more of a role in that version of the game. They had a little trailer for it and everything, but I didn't really think they were going to pull that over to this version of the game, but they did in this very small way. It could have been more, but it was actually fairly disappointing. But like I said, I think the storyline for this game is fairly solid. It's your very typical vampire story, honestly. If you're a veteran of Vampire the Masquerade, you probably will be able to suss out a lot of the story beats very quickly, simply because you've probably played a whole lot of Vampire. You know what kind of things go where and what certain clues allude to typically. They didn't do a whole lot to try to subvert expectation in this game, but it's not a bad story. The weakest part of the story, I think, overall, when it comes to payoff, is the endings, which is a big deal because I think endings should be, pretty substantial. But in this game, I feel like going through all of the dialogue, all of the talking, all of the fighting, and then at the end of this game, you get essentially a like narrated like cut, not even a cutscene. It's just kind of like a slideshow of the aftermath, and it's narrated by a specific character depending on the ending you get. You don't get to have after the fact conversations. You don't get to see a fully fleshed out rendered cutscene of things happening to people, which I think is really disappointing because the game looks really good, and I think they could have done really well with having fully fleshed out ending cutscenes and sequences, but all they had was like narrated slideshow stuff, which I think was kind of a letdown. The other part that I thought was really good but also kind of bad was Fabian's part of the story, the Malkavian in the head of the main character. While this like noir detective style story was actually really interesting, after the first playthrough, it's completely useless to go through it again because there is no deviating paths in this part of the gameplay. For those of you that don't know, you play as Fire, an elder that wakes up in modern times, and you have a Malkavian stuck in your head because you Diablerized this Malkavian in the early parts of the game. You play as Fire, and then during certain sequences, you'll play as Fabian going through his past memories. And Fabian's part of the story, I think, takes about 1/3 of the overall storyline, and his part of the story is essentially just walking around, talking to people, getting clues, and solving a mystery. There is no combat or anything of that nature. You do use a special set of powers that he has specifically for detecting and things of that nature, for sleuthing. And like I said, the first time playing it, it's actually pretty interesting. You get a lot of really cool like noir beats and whatnot, which is really dope. You go back in time based on his memory, which is cool. But after you beat the game once, you don't want to play through Fabian's side of the story again because you've already done it once and there's no change. Like I said, there's no deviating paths, there's no alternate endings, there's nothing. They are coming out with a update to make it to where after you play through it the first time, you can skip his side of the story, which is cool, but at the same time, I think this is also not cool because if you have to deliberately put an update to have people skip a whole third of the story to not, be bored replaying it, I think that was a design flaw that they overlooked. But like I said, the story, Fabian's and Fire's, I thought was pretty interesting. The characters themselves were pretty interesting. The combat was fun, but it did fall kind of flat about halfway through. It gets very repetitive. There wasn't really any RPG elements, and then the biggest faux pas, I think, for the gameplay was the masquerade system was very, very sparse. You essentially have like a masquerade meter, and if you do things in front of mortals, the masquerade meter goes up from green all the way to red, and if the red part gets all the way filled up, you get insta-killed by one of the characters in the game if you are eagle-eyed enough to notice the hand putting a stake through your heart. And then you just kind of reset. In the first Bloodlines games, you would have like a 5-point system where every time you broke the Masquerade, you get a point, and those points would be permanent. And if you got 5 points, you would be killed. You would be hunted down and straight up killed. It gave that kind of sense of the gravity of what you were doing because you were slowly building up to the Masquerade breaches, and the higher Masquerade breach points you had, the more enemies would like spawn and try to like mess with you. Like if you were at like 3 or 4, hunters would start showing up randomly in the levels and trying to mess with you. But in this case, it doesn't do that. It's just kind of there. And then on top of that, it's really easy to avoid the Masquerade meter going up because all you really have to do is like jump up on a rooftop and wait until the meter goes down. So the Masquerade mechanic in this game was not very robust. It was almost ancillary in the way it worked, and I found that to be disappointing. There was no humanity system in this game, but that makes sense to me because you're playing an elder, so I'm not too concerned about that. I don't expect humanity to play a big role if you're playing an elder vampire like Fire, who's got a past. Overall, I think the powers themselves are really cool. A lot of people are kind of, I don't know, they're nitpicking on the fact that the powers just don't seem like why would Fire have this? Why would they be able to do this? And from my experience being a veteran of Vampire the Masquerade, elders can do all sorts of wacky shit. As a matter of fact, the powers you gain in this game are not new powers that you learn, but they're old powers that Fire knew in her past, or his past, and you just kind of regain that memory of using those powers because the mark that was put on you fucks with your ability to use your powers, essentially. So, fun fact, all the powers you can learn in Bloodlines 2 are powers that Fire already had, which makes her extremely powerful. I keep referring to her because I think Fire canonically is a her, at least in my head. The powers are cool. The traversal system is actually really cool. I really liked running around through the rooftops and moving and doing all the crazy things like jumping and gliding and all that stuff. And later on in the game, the rooftops are filled with more enemies, which are fun to blow through. The side quests in this game are exceedingly mediocre. They don't really have a lot of gravitas to them. They don't really build on the world as much as I wish they would have, like they did in the first Bloodlines game. They're very repetitive because they cycle through the same like 3 or 4 types of side missions. I did them, and like I said, I enjoyed the game. I was really into playing it because I love Vampire the Masquerade, and the graphics of this game were pretty good for me. I'm not a huge graphics guy, but the graphics in this game were good enough for me to enjoy them. The combat was good enough for me to enjoy, and the story was good enough for me to enjoy. So overall, I probably would give this game a 6 out of 10. If I'm trying to rate this game, not comparing it to Bloodlines, I would say it's probably a 7. If I was doing it based solely on Bloodlines expectations, it'd probably be like a 4 or 5. So I kind of evened it out and say that it's a 6 out of 10 for me. It's definitely not worth like 60 or 70 bucks. I would probably purchase it on sale. I think it's worth 20 or 30, to be honest with you. I am going to play the DLCs when they come out. They do plan on coming out with those DLCs still, which I think is cool. I was worried that because the revenue failure for the game, that news came out, they probably were going to cancel DLCs because it wasn't worth it financially, as a lot of video games do when they fail like this. But they are still trying to come out with those, and they're coming out with other updates as well for holidays and other things like that. So they are still servicing the game, which is cool. I do plan on doing a 3rd playthrough when they add the update to be able to skip Fabian's story, because I do want to try to get as many of the endings as I can. I've gotten 2 of them so far. But my overall opinion, like I said, 6 out of 10. I think it's worth playing if you enjoy vampires. I think it's worth playing if you are a Vampire the Masquerade fan. I definitely wouldn't get my hopes up and, in this game being a Bloodlines true successor, because it sure the hell is not. But I think it's a fun game. I wouldn't buy it at full price, but I would definitely play it, and I suggest that you guys play it. I think it's worth doing. Sink your fangs into. There isn't a whole lot of good video game content out there for World of Darkness, but yeah, this game, you know what this game kind of reminded me of? It reminded me of like a more advanced version of Swan Song. If you've played Swan Song, you know what I'm talking about. As a matter of fact, I kind of wish they would have the conversation boss battles in this game that they did in Swan Song on top of everything else it had. I think that would have made it a little bit more robust, but I digress. Anyway, I enjoyed the game. 6 out of 10. Don't buy it at full price. I'm going to do a 3rd playthrough. I'm going to play the DLCs, and I'll probably have another follow-up video talking about those. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this review. I'm not a review guy. I don't like to get into the crazy details and nitty-gritty aspects of things, but I did want to review this game because I am such an avid Vampire the Masquerade fan, obviously. So hopefully this was useful to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much and you guys were able to get the context of what I was saying. Like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Check out my Patreon if you would. And I'll see you in the next video real soon. And remember, nothing good ever happens after dark.